Well, hello, Endow, ladies and friends. Simone here, Director of Program Growth, and I have the pleasure of being in the company of my colleague, Laura Zambrana, our Director of Content. Hi, Laura.
Hello, Simone.
Well, we are gathered together today to talk about why we endow. And we've been doing these Why We Endow events every month of 2022. And now we are in 2023, and we want to explain a little bit about why we endow. In other words, endow is an acronym. It stands for Educating on the Nature and Dignity of Women. That was inspired by John Paul II's apostolic letter, Mulieris Dignitatum, on the dignity and vocation of women. So when we say why we endow, what we're really saying is, why do we educate on the nature and dignity of women? So Laura, why do we educate on the nature and dignity of women?
Great
Because
question.
you've been an endow woman for over a decade now. So I just want to hear your thoughts on that.
So, Endow educates on the nature and dignity of women because women deserve to have their intellects dignified, meaning that we are called to study, to learn more about who we are, what the church says about women, and also what the church says in general about living the good life. So, Endow calls women together to study the documents of the church. So we don't just hear about the documents in the news or never hear about them, or hear from the pulpit here and there, but we actually gather together in small groups to read the documents and hear them alive with our friends. And then we also have the Endow commentaries on the documents to further unpack them. So Endow exists precisely because women deserve that space in their lives to study.
Yeah, yeah. And that the genius of women that John Paul II believed in so much. So he writes this apostolic letter in the 80s, Mulieris Dignitatum, and then later on he writes a letter to all women of the world in 1995, and he's really galvanizing women to really believe in the genius of their feminine spirit, but that genius, okay, which is often called the feminine genius, right? The cultivation of that genius, it takes cultivating. And so we cultivate it, as you mentioned, in these small group communities based on the documents of the church documents and the writings of the saints and female doctors of the church, with a preference to John Paul II, which he thought, and this is, very often quoted, but for those who have never heard it, that the genius of women is vital and essential for the church and for the world. So it's very serious business what we are embarking on. So we have a web page here, and by the way, this was in the founding of Endow. The founders of Endow encountered these documents and were stunned by them and thought, wow, every woman needs to have access not just to the writings about the genius of women, but to papal documents, church documents, encyclicals, apostolic letters, the writings of the saints in general. And so, this is part of our intellectual inheritance that deserves to be treated as seriously as they were seriously written.
Mm-hmm.
So I want to pull up, and it's linked below in this YouTube video as well as the podcast. We have a web page that says Why Endow, Our Method and Our Goals. So I'd like us to read that. And reading aloud is part of the Endow method, which we'll discuss in just a minute, but I think it's actually worth hearing these words out loud. So Laura, would you, I'll read the first part if you would be willing to read the second part.
Yes.
So why endow? The path of intellectual discipleship and hospitality. Endow recognizes that the church is mater et magistra, mother and teacher. We believe, therefore, that important documents are of prophetic value to women and are her rightful inheritance. In other words, the voice of the church speaks truth to the heart of every woman. There is a vocation to study, and to study a particular document in this moment of life. In taking up this call, the Endow experience becomes an encounter of one's spiritual daughterhood and motherhood. One is always both a student and a teacher. Every woman has a rich history of life experience to share, as well as something to learn from her sisters in Christ. Through Endow groups, women carve out time in their life to pursue the intellectual life. Our hope is to deepen each woman's love for God with her whole heart, mind, soul, and strength, emphasis on mind, since love desires knowledge and knowledge kindles love. Love is the ultimate goal of study and the profound meaning of one's life, purpose, and destiny. It is the only source of true happiness in this life and the next. So, ladies, there's a lot to unpack there. We're not going to unpack it together here, obviously, as deeply as we could. Laura and we could talk for hours. But if you're watching this short little video or listening to it before coming to one of our monthly, events, you can bring kind of your questions about why endow, the path of intellectual discipleship and hospitality. You can bring those questions to our monthly meetings, and we would be happy to discuss them with you further. Okay, Laura, you want to take our method?
Sure. Our method, an inspired approach. Women read aloud together an important church document or writing of a saint, followed by a group discussion. Each Endow study guide is designed to make the text accessible by including not only the actual document, but an accompanying commentary and discussion questions to integrate both the mind and the heart of each woman. Accompany. As we study together, we grow closer to Christ and each other through the blessing of each other's presence, the rich text, and the dialogue it inspires. Endow women recognize that the group is there to accompany each other in authentic belonging and confidentiality in a sacred space of non-judgmental friendship. Read. We take turns reading aloud the sections of the text together while meditating on its relevance for our personal lives. Discuss. We discuss what struck us from the text or answer some of the discussion questions at the end of each section. The role of the facilitator is to help guide the dialogue and make easy the voice of truth by keeping the group focused on the study guide text while also allowing for personal sharing. The facilitator is not expected to be a teacher, theologian, or philosopher in this context. If challenging questions arise, do not hesitate to contact Endow for help and guidance. Pray. We begin and end the meeting in prayer and intercede for each other's intentions throughout the study. Shall I do goals?
Okay. I was going to say, so our last part is goals. So so that's our method. It's very simple. There's obviously a friendship that develops with women who gather together under the context of studying these texts. Reading aloud, there's a lot we could say about how being read to out loud and reading aloud is educationally beneficial. And then, of course, this is not just an intellectual exercise order just to the gaining of knowledge, but that the knowledge is then ordered to a deeper union with Christ. And so that kind of bleeds into our goals. Yes, Laura, if you'd like to read the goals, that'd be great.
Our goals. The world needs what you are, not what you have. St. Edith Stein. To help every woman discover her identity as a daughter of God, loved into being and called to be in communion with the Holy Trinity. I love these goals. To suggest key church documents that encourage women to grow intellectually, spiritually, and emotionally through deepened thought and conversation. To build a life together by connecting women in their local areas as a remedy to the epidemic of loneliness. To equip women with resources necessary to give a reason for the hope that is in them to an unbelieving world. To deepen the awareness of each woman's personal vocation expressed uniquely in spiritual motherhood. To answer John Paul II's call for a new feminism, for the renewal of a culture of life and love. I love these goals, Simone.
I mean, they're pretty noble, they're pretty lofty, and they're what we're called to. They're what we're called to live the authentic Christian life. I think one of the things I really appreciate about Endow, and something we've talked about a lot, Laura, is that in the context of these Endow groups, there is this discernment that happens in terms of the next phase of someone's personal vocation, so we've talked about that a lot. But again, it's something very dynamic. So I'd like to let you know that the next podcast we're going to be releasing is another short podcast on why study church documents, because I think that merits its own conversation. We do have a YouTube video up on how to facilitate a group, so you can find that on our YouTube channel. We'll also link it below. And we might actually put it on the podcast as well, although I think it's something that's nice to actually watch the Endow team facilitating a group led by Laura, who's been an Endow host for 10 years. And then I invite you to join us for one of our monthly Why We Endow events, if you want to get a kind of a live action experience of it. And then certainly I want to encourage you to strongly consider hosting an Endow group. Sometimes it's easier to fill out that I want to join a group form and see if some other woman will end up hosting, and that's fine, and that happens frequently, and we're very happy when it does. But it's a new year, new courage, and as Laura mentioned in reading the page, you don't have to be a theological expert to be an Endow host. You simply have to be somebody who has a desire and who's willing to facilitate these conversations. Anything else you want to add, Laura, before we say goodbye?
I wanted to add on that note that the group can be as small as you and your two friends, just diving in, just creating the space to study together. You won't regret that time and that commitment to meeting together, a group of 2 people, 3, and the bigger groups too. So we're excited for you to join in.
Yes. And I forgot to mention that each Endow study guide has a study guide planning page with tons and tons of resources, logistical information, marketing material, all of those things. And of course, you have the Endow team at your service to accompany and mentor you as you accompany and mentor the women in your Endow group. Okay, we look forward to hearing from you.